dangerous mutants, deadly radiation, priceless artifacts, and abandoned civilization are all hallmarks of the S.T.A.L.K.E.R universe. This is the full history of the S.T.A.L.K.E.R universe. With the horrors of World War II still in recent memory, and a new technological and military arms race in full swing, both the USSR and the West were competing for dominance. To achieve this, secret programs and black projects were greenlit on both sides, with ethics often being tossed to the wayside. The Agroprom Research Institute, located in rural Ukraine, was officially a scientific endeavor to unlock the secrets of increasing crop yields through genetic selection. But unofficially, it was a front to explore new discoveries in the field of consciousness control. Anyone visiting Agroprom at the time would see a modern but small research facility and some small fields of experimental crops and think nothing of it. But underneath the facility, in secret underground laboratories, scientists were making breakthroughs in accessing the consciousness of small rodents and animals, even being able to suggest simple commands to the creatures which they would promptly obey. Encouraged by these successes, and with nearly limitless funding and resources, scientists continued their consciousness control research for nearly 2 decades undisturbed, including building additional facilities around the region.
Внимание, внимание! Внимание, внимание! Внимание, внимание! Уважаемые товарищи! Городской совет народных депутатов.
A large explosion rocked the city of Pripyat, ripping its citizens from sleep as they gazed in horror at the glowing fireball on the horizon at the site of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. A scheduled test of reactor number 4 had failed horribly in a symphony of errors involving both design flaws and operator oversight. Unable to shut down the reactor safely, operators were helpless to prevent it from melting down, and the resulting explosion caused the largest nuclear disaster in history. Unable to deny the severity of the disaster or to clean it up quickly, the nearby city of Pripyat was rapidly evacuated while hundreds of thousands of men from around the USSR were mobilized to become what would be known as liquidators, or those tasked with manually removing the highly radioactive debris from the power plant. In the disaster's aftermath, a large 2,600 square kilometer or 1,000 square mile exclusion zone was established by the Ukrainian government that mandated the evacuation of inhabitants and prohibited entry from outside persons. Over the years, the Chernobyl exclusion zone became a kind of macabre wonder of the world, as nature reclaimed its buildings and roads, and fascinated observers could witness a civilization frozen in time. Due to the Chernobyl disaster, the Agroprom Research Institute was officially shut down, although there are rumors that many continued their research despite the catastrophe. But later that year, most likely after the completion of the sarcophagus around the nuclear power plant, the Agroprom Research Institute was reinstated and projects resumed. The Soviet Union collapses. During this time, many former Soviet satellite nations declare their independence, including Ukraine, and numerous Soviet projects lose funding and governance. But researchers at Agroprom are making massive breakthroughs in a newly discovered field of science, the Noosphere. Akin to discovering a fourth dimension or time travel, this Noosphere was found to interact with all living beings, and can be described as a sphere of information and thought. third in the line after the geosphere and biosphere. As the population of thinking humans on Earth increases, and as their social structures become more complicated and advanced, so too does the Noosphere grow. And to the excitement of the researchers at Agroprom, the Noosphere could be manipulated. But rather than advance some kind of doomsday agenda of mind control, the lead researchers at Agroprom had more benevolent intentions behind harnessing and manipulating the Noosphere. Instead of controlling thoughts to win wars or elections, or to seek wealth or fame, these lead researchers, now referred to as the group, wanted to solve humanity's problems once and for all. War, hate, crime, division, violence, greed, cruelty, and every other aspect of humanity that was self-destructive could potentially be erased, or at least contained, if the Noosphere could be tapped into and controlled effectively. Much like how humanity has contained and controlled the biosphere with selective crop breeding and revitalized endangered species of animals, so too could the interconnected realm of thought be controlled. To achieve this, members of the group created the C consciousness, or common consciousness. Using lessons learned during the early days of Agroprom, and animal testing pointed towards the usefulness of high-powered antennae, which could emit psychic waves and manipulate the Noosphere and the minds and animals of people within its range. With a still operating nuclear power plant nearby, and numerous high-powered antennas in the region coupled with a completely abandoned area and a weakened Ukrainian government, it was the perfect setting to continue their work unchallenged. With the Chernobyl disaster now a distant memory for most of the world, the nuclear power plant and the surrounding area is seldom visited. Although those who do wish to adventure into its toxic land are returning with alarming reports. 6 new structures built very close to the power plant itself appear to be some kind of field generator, although no one seems to know its true purpose. Official investigations are opened by Ukraine's government and then closed just as quickly, when neither the resources or willingness to risk international sanctions for disturbing the power plant are abundant. This does not, however, stop urban legends and talk of strange and mysterious phenomenon occurring in the zone from spreading, and tourists from around the world begin to take interest in exploring these rumors for themselves. In some first-hand reports, returning adventurers claim to see strange creatures that do not fit the description of any animal, and strange occurrences that seem to bend or break the laws of physics. In 2001, a bus full of foreign tourists never returns from the zone, and the Ukrainian government seals the zone off completely and permanently. A flash of blinding light emanates from the center of the zone. After a period of 2 hours, the event ends as quickly as it came. Then, on April 12th at 2:33 p.m. local time, the event repeats itself again, with a flash of light powerful enough to permanently blind, but this time, all the clouds in the sky seemingly evaporate, and a deafening crash of thunder resounds that can be heard miles away, which was then followed by a short period of absolute silence. Then, a 6.9 magnitude earthquake rocked the zone, with its epicenter being located within just 1 kilometer of the nuclear power plant. The entire region was bathed in extremely high amounts of ionizing radiation that seemed to make the air and sky glow, and birds died instantly in air and fell to the ground. After several hours, the emission faded. Local officials attributed the disturbance to a nearby nuclear fuel dump abnormality, but as they would find out later, this was not the case. By June 10th, radiological surveys of the region have discovered that the zone around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant has grown, and following each of these strange emissions, continues to grow by 5 to 10 kilometers each time. It is also around this time that the zone fundamentally changes from a toxic buffer zone, protecting the site of a nuclear disaster, to a place that cannot be explained by science. These anomalies seemingly bend or completely break the laws of physics, with strange properties that are completely beyond explanation. In some observations, gravitational fields can warp gravity or produce high gravity zones without any physical mass present. In others, fire can burn indefinitely without any source of fuel, or electricity can surge without a power source or conduit. In the most extreme cases, lucky survivors that have returned from the zone report that some of these anomalies can cause objects to levitate or fly through the air, or even create a kind of wormhole or teleporter, as when an object is thrown into the anomaly, it instantly reappears in a completely different location, or is trapped inside in some kind of endless loop. But by far, some of the most horrifying anomalies were invisible psi fields that could scramble the brain of even the most resolute explorer, and they would begin to bash their heads against trees or concrete until they killed themselves. Worst yet, these anomalies can appear and disappear after each emission of the zone, with some anomalies being almost completely invisible to the naked eye. Following the April emission, or blowout as it's sometimes referred to as, most of the military stationed at the zone's borders, as well as researchers within the zone, died as a result to the exposure of the intense radiation. New borders of the zone are drawn, and once again, nearby residents flee in panic, or are forcefully evacuated. In response to these fatalities, and increasing concern over the strange and hostile nature of the zone and its wildlife, the Ukrainian military organizes a massive operation to reach the center of the zone and eliminate whoever or whatever is generating the emissions and anomalies. Even if it's the nuclear power plant itself, the objective of the mission is to destroy it using any means possible. Unfortunately, the ill-fated operation ended in complete disaster, with most of the military units dying in horrifying ways to anomalies before they ever reached the center. Without any way to detect or navigate the anomaly fields, the mission was doomed from the beginning. A small portion of the operation did survive, including a certain Captain Tachenko, who, after witnessing the horrors of the zone firsthand, decided to sabotage his own unit's communications to headquarters so that they would remain in the zone indefinitely. Then, banding together with other groups of military survivors to form an organization known as Duty, whose purpose was not unlike the original military operation: contain and eliminate the evils of the zone. Over the next several years, expeditions into the zone ended almost entirely in the deaths or disappearances of those brave enough to venture into it. Reports of horrifyingly mutated creatures, some with unique and deadly abilities, were increasing, and unless there was a breakthrough, penetrating the zone or stopping its growth seemed impossible. Ukrainian scientists tasked with observing and studying the zone have successfully engineered a device which can detect anomalies up to a distance of 10 meters. Also, with some anomalies being chemically toxic in nature, the scientists recommend wearing full NBC, or nuclear, biological, and chemical gear while attempting to explore the zone. Hoping that the unusual wildlife of the zone would be less active in colder weather, these scientists successfully returned from the zone without incident while equipped with the new detectors and managed to penetrate 1 kilometer deep into the zone. Over the course of the next year, copies of the anomaly detectors were either sold or stolen and reverse engineered and distributed to interested parties. The first real expeditions into the zone began, and then the next major discovery of the zone's mysteries was discovered. After navigating a dense anomaly field, one unnamed explorer found a mysterious rock-like object. This object was much like the anomalies, in that it bestowed its owner with otherworldly abilities, or could manipulate reality around it to have intended or unintended effects. These objects soon became known as artifacts, and the properties they could bestow on people in their possession were incredible. Some pioneers of the zone claimed that some artifacts could close horrific wounds, or turn your skin as tough as steel while still remaining flexible. Others were said to offer superhuman strength, or enhance the abilities of the mind far beyond even the most savant academics. But some of these artifacts also had pointed drawbacks. Nearly all artifacts were highly radioactive, meaning that special equipment and gear was needed to transport and use them effectively. And while still unconfirmed, some reports that unintended side effects would afflict the user if artifacts were used improperly. The same artifact that strengthened the skin against damage could completely immobilize and paralyze its user if they sustained too much damage. Either way, when word of these artifacts reached the ears of militaries, governments, scientists, and corporations around the world, demand for these artifacts exploded, and high bounties were offered for anyone who could safely bring one back from the zone. It is during this time that the first stalkers began to arrive in the zone. The name Stalker is both an acronym as well as a reference to how one must travel the zone in an extremely careful and deliberate manner. But the acronym refers mainly to the type of people who are attracted to the zone. The risk of death or disappearance was so high in the zone that usually only those with nothing to lose would consider venturing into it. Stalker is short for scavengers, trespassers, adventurers, loners, killers, explorers, and robbers, which perfectly describes the typical demographic of those within the zone. And while nearly all stalkers were seeking fortune or fame in the zone, to some, it was also an escape. It was a place completely devoid of laws or government, and the perfect place for a criminal to avoid prosecution, or a loner to escape their past. It was a return to a more primitive set of rules, where nobody could stop you from doing almost anything, including killing. But then again, what's to stop the other guy as well? Due to this, uneasy alliances and small bands of stalkers would form small groups for protection. But until more organized groups arrived in the zone, these alliances could just as easily dissolve once something valuable was found. Recognizing that stalkers could somewhat safely travel the zone if properly equipped with gear that could detect anomalies and defend against radiation, chemical burns, and other environmental hazards, the Ukrainian military created the first military stalkers. These specially outfitted units had a much better chance of reaching the center of the zone, so a new military operation was planned. By the beginning of 2011, a plan to seize control of the nuclear power plant and hopefully stop whatever was causing the anomalies was completed, and a massive raid began led by military stalkers. They were parachuted close to the power plant itself, but this action seemed to trigger another massive emission. The operation again ended in disaster, but a portion of the military stalkers survived and wandered the zone for some time, before finding the survivors of the previous military raid, now known as Duty, and were absorbed into it, making Duty the largest faction in the zone. At this point, the cat was out of the proverbial bag, and news that it was possible to survive in the zone deeper than just a few kilometers was spreading. Adventurers, criminals, researchers, glory seekers, and profiteers flocked to the zone, and either adapted to the stalker life or quickly died. Trading posts were set up in relatively safe areas by those with reliable outside connections to food, water, medicines, and drugs, and firearms. It was obvious by now that being armed within the zone was a requirement, either to defend yourself against the horrifying mutants or to defend yourself from other stalkers. Initially, the Ukrainian government ignored the explosion of new stalkers, not wanting to allocate even more manpower and resources to the zone. But after a few high-profile incidents of artifacts making their way into the hands of various corporations and entities outside of the zone, a crackdown was enforced, and dozens of active and suspected stalkers were arrested, and several trading posts were shut down. It was also in early 2011 that the first reports of zombies began to be whispered among stalker groups. It was unknown if these were actually the dead that had returned to life, or if they were humans that had suffered from some kind of traumatic brain injury. Either way, they fit all of the hallmarks of a classic zombie-like creature. Motor skills were greatly inhibited, so they shambled in a slow and jerky way. Speech was often monotone and slurred, and they seemed to sustain themselves off of raw flesh. In one of the first sightings, an observer claimed that a zombie spoke English, leading him to believe that it may have been part of a group of American stalkers that had disappeared in the zone almost a decade previously. Unsure of how or why they'd ended up this way, it was yet another horrifying addition to the list of dangers the zone had in store for would-be explorers. By the autumn of 2011, The leading hypothesis of how zombie stalkers emerged from the zone was due to a high-powered antenna array about midway to the center of the zone, lovingly dubbed the Brain Scorcher. At the time, stalkers didn't know that this was part of the psi wave experiments conducted by the group that was studying the Noosphere. But a huge group of stalkers, confident in their protective gear and their wits, launched a massive raid on the Brain Scorcher array in an effort to either deactivate it or move beyond it. Curiously, rather than become zombies, the entirety of the stalker group all felt a sense of almost blissful calm, and when their minds were linked with the mysterious object at the center of the zone, which they knew only as the Monolith, these stalkers then became the faction known as Monolith, and they defended the Brain Scorcher site as well as moved deeper into the zone, to the power plant itself, and became its guardians that defended the center of the zone with a kind of quasi-religious zeal. Monolith was extremely formidable in combat, completely unafraid of death or injury, which made them extremely dangerous opponents. If a Monolithian was somehow incapacitated or captured, he would immediately kill himself using any means necessary, including bashing his own skull against a concrete wall or floor. Over time, however, most likely from acquiring journals or records or eavesdropping on conversations, it was recognized that members of Monolith believed the zone was alive, and that the Monolith itself was an alien crystal at the center of the zone, which they referred to as the Wish Granter, meaning it could make almost anything you desire come true if you're able to reach it. Not long after the creation of the Monolith faction, a small band of free stalkers by the name of S.T.A.L.K.E.R, Ghost, and Fang managed to make their way beyond the Brain Scorcher without becoming a zombie or a Monolithian. But their intrusion was met by a retaliation by the zone. A massive emission, the biggest one yet, completely changed the landscape of the zone. Previously explored routes became impassable due to large anomaly fields, while new safe routes opened up. This caused friction between the somewhat agreeable factions within the new zone, such as Duty, Bandits, Free Stalkers, and others, as they all attempted to lay claim to new territories and the prospect of new loot. One of the only permanent military installations in the zone, known as the Army Warehouses, which housed military and Spetsnaz stalker units, was almost completely eradicated during this emission, and a group of stalkers moved into the old base and formed a new faction, Freedom, which held the belief that the zone is a gift to the world, and to anyone seeking the opportunity to be their own person, without interference from laws, governments, and social rules. Their almost flippant attitude towards the zone caused immediate conflicts with members of Duty. What most likely started out as a few heated arguments about dogma and ideals around campfires quickly turned into shootouts. Before long, Duty and Freedom had become mortal enemies, and a shoot-on-sight order was issued to both groups. By October 2011, the Ukrainian military, still attempting to keep peace on the borders of the zone, as well as explore deeper into it, had several violent encounters with various groups of stalkers that resulted in even more fatalities of military stalkers. And so, the Ukrainian military adopted a shoot-on-sight order for any stalkers, with the only exception being scientific groups and research expeditions. The stalker known as S.T.A.L.K.E.R awakens in the bunker of a well-known dealer of arms and supplies, Sidorovich. Suffering from amnesia and close to death, he doesn't even know his own name, and soon is known simply as the Marked One, as his forearm bears the tattoo, Stalker. On his PDA device, a single phrase becomes his mission, kill S.T.A.L.K.E.R, although he is completely unaware at the time that he was in fact S.T.A.L.K.E.R himself. Over the course of the next few months, S.T.A.L.K.E.R makes his way to the Brain Scorcher radio array and miraculously deactivates it, allowing him and anyone else brave enough to make their way deeper to the heart of the zone. Over time, S.T.A.L.K.E.R begins to piece together his past and regain his former identity, as well as learn more about the zone and what or who created it. And that responsibility ultimately rested on what is known as the C consciousness. With a newfound sense of purpose, S.T.A.L.K.E.R tasks himself with learning everything he can about the zone, so that he may reach its center and discover if the monolith or the wish granter is in fact real, and destroy the sea consciousness to prevent the zone from growing. S.T.A.L.K.E.R accomplishes his goal and reaches the sea consciousness. It is a large room with 7 scientists locked in life support stasis capsules, their minds and consciousness linked. It was these original pioneers of the Noosphere that created the zone, its anomalies, and horrifying beasts. Although simply byproducts of the more noble intention of ridding humanity of its flaws, to S.T.A.L.K.E.R, what they had created was an abomination that must be destroyed. Readying his AK rifle, S.T.A.L.K.E.R unleashed a fully automatic burst of gunfire into the encapsulated scientists that made up the sea consciousness and destroyed it. Unfortunately, what had been done could not be undone. The zone had become individualized from the meddling of the sea consciousness, and after it was destroyed, the zone fought back, and it became even more dangerous and unstable than before. S.T.A.L.K.E.R continued to wander the zone and investigate its mysteries, perhaps becoming the most informed stalker to ever live. He is certain that there are more mysteries yet to uncover, and he intends to find them. I hope that you enjoyed this somewhat condensed history of the Stalker universe and the zone. For Stalker veterans out there, you might be screaming at your monitors about the absence of Clear Sky and some of the content from Call of Pripyat. Those 2 games deserve their own videos, and I didn't want it to slow down the overall big picture of the zone. There's still a ton of stuff to go over, however. Things like the Noosphere, Mutants, Anomalies, factions, weapons, secret labs, etc. are all subjects that I'd love to do videos on. If there's anything Stalker related that you guys would like to hear about, let me know in the comments and I'll definitely take your feedback into account. As always, thank you for all the support, and please leave a like if you enjoyed this video. It's good to be back.